Right, well, thank you all for coming on this hot day, very hot day. This talk is a homage to my father, Bertie Cooper Smith, who used to be a physicist and was a very wise man, very gentle, very patient. He's still with us, and he was a wonderful father, and I learned so much from him. And actually, I'm going to give a little story, which is one of the things that I learned from him about the importance of science, which is before I start my main talk. The talk is going to be about not just the principle of least action, but how an important principle in physics can help us in our understanding of economics. And you might think, well, how can I dare to do this? What can physics say to economics? Well, I'm not at all impressed by over-scientism and phony science that we are subjected to a lot today. For example, a little parody, the children in this class all suffer from 2 arms and 2 legs syndrome, for example, and you all know what I'm talking about. There's just a lot of nonsense going under the name of science, and we are here under the auspices of the British Association for the Advancement of Science, so I'm going to try and redress the balance with this little story that my father told me, and how we have deep wisdom from science, the natural sciences, and so we certainly can use that wisdom in all walks of life. So the story starts like this. I was talking to a friend and she said, whenever I think of Steve, she was in love with Steve, it's funny that in my lunch break when I think of him, he calls. It's telepathy. And I thought, funny, because you're probably always thinking about him, or every other minute, so the chances of him calling are pretty high when you've just been thinking about him. And another friend said, you should try echinacea. It's really going to stop you getting a cold. And if you get a cold, you'll get rid of that cold so quickly. And I just thought, well, how do you know that the cold isn't just getting better all by itself? So this is sort of science that's in everyday life and barely counts as science. And then my father gave me this following example. Now, when you do an experiment, it's in a lab, right? But an experiment from which you can derive evidence and draw conclusions doesn't have to be carried out in a lab. It can just be noticing things in the world around you. So my father considered this as an experiment to show you the security of our knowledge in physics. We're all told that our laws are provisional, we have to constantly correct them, they could change tomorrow, and that is true, we must always be aware of that. But now, let's think of this story of his. Supposing you consider the broadcasting of the World Cup football final. You could have 2 billion television sets, including watching it through computers and other devices, turned on, because we have a population of 7.5 billion now, so you could get, say, up to 2 billion people, devices tuned in. And then when people watch it all around the world, they don't just see whether a light goes from red to green, say. No, there's the area of the pitch. I don't know anyone know how big a football pitch is, the area of it? The disposition of 22 players for 1.5 hours, excluding the interval, and a ball, second by second. That's the sort of knowledge we have. So you go to work or to school the next day or on your social website and communicate, and you say to your friends, did you see Zidane kick that ball, or Gary Lineker do that save, or whatever? My football knowledge is not very up to date. But anyway, the point is that you find you agree with the person that you're talking to. 2 billion people have the same result for this experiment carried around all round the world. Is it coincidence? Even where some of the televisions don't work, we know why they haven't worked most of the time. So if you say echinacea is good for you, probably the odds are like 1.01 to 1 that it's, I'm not so cynical, maybe it helps a little tiny bit. The odds that what's happening, because to construct these television sets and the transmitting station and do all the recordings, it's not hocus pocus. It uses every law of physics. I'm not talking about the recent physics that still hasn't established itself, fringe physics. I'm talking established physics. It's not going to be overturned tomorrow or the next day. The odds of that just being coincidence are effectively zero. So the odds that we know something, we could say, are 1 trillion to 1. I don't know quite how to quantify this, but you see what I'm talking about. So I want to make you really impressed, because we are, and not apologetic, we're really impressed with the sort of knowledge that science is bringing in, because we're getting into bad times when there are people talking about alt realities and knocking science, and I want to knock that on the head. So that is the example of a wonderful story from my father.